What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video and Tour Thunder Junction, which is going to feature the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set is in the draft portion, which is going to be a lot of fun and something I've been having a lot of fun just playing. I'm addicted to playing that limited format. It's been amazing, and honestly, I'll take it however I can get it, and if that's vicariously living through some of the other Pro Tour participants, then so be it. On top of that, too, of course, this will feature Standard as the constructed format of the event. A little less excited about that, but from what I understand, Standard's in a pretty good place, so I think it's worth kind of watching and seeing what's going on, especially if you're a person that's into Standard. You're going to be watching some of the best players in the world not only draft but play these limited decks, figure out these constructed decks, and seeing what they think is the best, their reasons why, and again getting to see some high level play to maybe level up your play if you end up playing any of these decks in the format, of course. But this whole video we're going to be kind of giving you a primer, things to expect and things to know, kind of going through, and of course the metagame breakdown of the event, and of course my own personal thoughts and opinions, because why would I not add my own little flair to this video as well. So if any of that interests you, you want to see more content from me, I do mainly Modern and Pioneer, looking to maybe get into Arena in the future. Who knows? If you want to check any of that stuff out, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when those future videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support my content, and if you would like to go even further with your support, I do have channel memberships and things like that. So if that's something that interests you, feel free to sign up for a membership and get access to some pretty unique benefits, with more to come in the future. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into Pro Tour Thunder Junction. We're going to look at the fact sheet, and then we're going to look at the limited format and the constructed format, and I do it in that way because that's kind of the order in which we'll see kind of those sets and everything. So Pro Tour Thunder Junction will take place in Seattle, USA this weekend, April 26th to the 28th of 2024. This event will not be at MagicCon, so it will not be open to the public, which is a little unfortunate. I really like it when these Pro Tours are pretty much open, where you have, the players are playing their own separate part of the hall, and then you have, just a whole convention, stuff like that going on. Just if you're not able to go to a Pro Tour, or you never think that you'll be able to qualify, what have you, which we'll actually go over ways that you can qualify, this is kind of a fun way to be in that environment without necessarily being in the environment, if you get what I'm saying. So, Seattle Convention Center, the invited competitors, so the Pro Tours are invitation-only tournaments, so they're awarded to the following players: the top 8 finishers at the Magic World Championship last year, competitors with 39 or more points in adjusted match points generated at the conclusion of the previous Pro Tour, Murders at Karlov Manor, top finishing competitors in each Pro Tour Thunder Junction Regional Championship, Pro Tour Murders at Karlov Manor competitors who finished with 30 or more match points, competitors in each MTG Arena qualifier weekend with 7 wins that award invitations to Pro Tour Thunder Junction, 8 competitors from the Magic Online Champions Showcase that award invitations to Pro Tour Thunder Junction, members of the Pro Tour Hall of Fame that have selected Pro Tour Thunder Junction as their one per season Pro Tour invitation benefit, competitors that are otherwise invited to Pro Tour Thunder Junction. This is essentially a line that, if you're a streamer or something you could essentially be invited, at least how I understand it, you can be invited to the event without necessarily going through any of the other previous qualifications of it. And of course, a little list here of all the links down in the description down below if you want to check these out for yourself. So deck list needed to be submitted a Wednesday, so it should have been yesterday at 12 p.m. And we, of course, got the metagame breakdown today. So we'll end up going over that part in the standard portion of this video. The hall hours, which to me doesn't really matter, considering that, if you're not playing in the event, it doesn't really matter because it's not open to the public. You have in-person registration for the event. Competitors should email if they want to be attending Thursday registration session. Other information that you need to provide: the competitive rules enforcement or professional rules enforcement for the event. The structure of the Swiss rounds is going to be 3 rounds of Outlaws of Thunder Junction booster draft, followed by 5 rounds of Standard on Friday. Same thing on Saturday, 3 rounds of Thunder Junction booster draft, followed by 5 rounds of Standard constructed, with 16 total Swiss rounds at 50 minutes per round. Things that we're, other than playing 16 rounds, 50 minutes per round, something that we're used to. All competitors may participate in all Swiss rounds of Friday's competitions. So basically meaning that, you have to be 4-4 by the end of day one to qualify for the second day of competition. So, if you have, you're 0-5, you're dead to make day two, but you can play all your Swiss rounds is what that's saying. So, all competitors with 12 or more match points after round 8 will advance to Saturday's portion of the competition. Chances are, if you're 4-4, you're not going to make top 8, but, it is the Pro Tour. It's worth kind of like playing all your matches and getting the experience, playing some of the best players in the world. Whenever a competitor reaches the designated number of match wins before round 16, they immediately advance to the top 8 playoff and are removed from future pairings and Swiss rounds. The designated number of match wins will be determined the week of April 22nd, 2024. So this is kind of determined by like the amount of players there are, and this is something that has recently been added, within like the last, I would say 2 years, I believe, where if a player reaches, say, like 13 wins or, gets 12 wins, that's 36 match points, they're essentially drawing the rest of the time to get the top 8. So they're going to end up, I believe, still accruing points. As long as they've, qualified for that, they're just going to move on without any, without having to worry about playing and everything like that. They're essentially like dropped from the tournament because they're dropped right into the top 8. Competitors in the top 8 playoff are seeded in order 1 through 8. The seeding is determined by the round in which the competitor received the designated number of match wins. So I believe if you're the first one, you're going to be the first seed. Their opponent's match win percentage, game win percentage, and opponent game win percentage as of the round in which they receive their designated number of match wins. Seeding in the top 8 playoff is locked after each round in which a competitor reaches their designated number of match wins. So it's something I kind of explained, where if you're the first one, you're going to be the second one. If you're the second one, you'll be the second one, so on. So it just kind of keeps going down the line until we get to the last round, where some players are going to have to play like a winning in, kind of sweat it out and hope that their breakers hold up. The top 8 competitors after round 16 will advance to Sunday's single elimination playoff rounds, which is going to be standard. Playoff rounds use a traditional single elimination bracket, so you'll be paired 1 through 8, 2 through 7, 3 through 6, 4 against 5. All playoff matches are best 3 out of 5, where we have best 2 out of 3 in the Swiss rounds. The first 2 games are played in the playoff are pre-sideboard games, and then after game 2 is completed, competitors may exchange cards from their deck with the cards on their sideboard. Standings after the Swiss rounds are used to determine the final order of the standings for losing competitors in the quarterfinals and semifinals of the round. While there are no time limits in playoff rounds, competitors are expected to play at a reasonable pace and finish the matches within 90 minutes. So this only comes up because if you play in RCQs and stuff like that, you will be untimed in the top 8, but you are expected to play at a reasonable pace, like this says. I don't know if 90 minutes is necessarily the benchmark that we want to essentially move to, but typically judges and things like that will not take issue with how you're playing as long as you are making decisions at reasonable junctions at reasonable times. If you spend 10-15 minutes on your turn 1 play, I would say only in a few formats where that would even remotely be acceptable, but 10 to 15 minutes is pretty excessive. You need to do something. But, if you're later in the game and it's a tense situation, if you're, there's actually a complex board state going on, if you take 2, 3, 4 minutes to kind of break it down and figure out what decisions that you have to make, and then make a decision, that I would say is a reasonable amount of time given the situation that is going on. For the first game in each match in the playoff round, the competitors that finish higher in the Swiss rounds will either choose to play first or play second. For subsequent games in each playoff match, the usual play-draw rules apply, meaning that the loser of the previous game decides whether they play first in the next game. So essentially, seeding is important. If you're the number 1 seed, no matter who you play against, you are always going to be on the play, where if you're the 8th seed, you're going to always end up being at the mercy of the other player. So just things to kind of keep in mind. If you've been around for a while, that's kind of how seeding and everything works. You want to be the higher seed. You want to be a top 4 seed because you're guaranteed, at least in the first round of elimination rounds, to be on the play, which we know is super key, especially in some decently high-powered formats. The schedule for the day, 9 o'clock, the competitors meeting begins. Draft begins at 9:05. And then Saturday, 9:05 again, the other draft begins, and then we go proceed through the day, and then the quarterfinal begins at 8:45 on Sunday, which I believe is going to be Seattle time, which if you're on the East Coast is going to be 3-4 hours ahead, so you won't see anything until 11:45, noon on Sunday for the elimination rounds. Professional rules enforcement have to use the same standard deck in day 1, day 2, and the top 8 playoff. Might be what's the word I'm looking for? It might be self-explanatory, but basically you have it in writing so nobody can say, well, it wasn't in the rules, and then you kind of have to let it happen. And we kind of know how crazy it would be if you have a day 1, day 2 deck, and then you see the top 8 and you're like, okay, I'm going to, audible to this, especially if all the other players are under the impression that they keep the same deck, then you switch yours, have a better matchup overall against the top 8. Not saying that that's ever happened in history. Maybe it's happened, but, that is just there for, the sake of that. Prizes. This is the prize breakdown. First place, $50,000, with second place getting $30,000. The semi-finalists getting $15,000. 5th through 8 getting $10,000. Of course, these players also getting invited to the next Pro Tour as well. I believe all the way to top 32, or I guess 36 match points, however it works out. 9 through 12, 75. 13 through 16, 5,000. All the way down to 210th place is $1,000. Assumes 209 players. So, essentially $1,000 for 133rd through 209. So $1,000, from what I understand, just to participate in the event. So, that's pretty cool. Getting $1,000, like going to a tournament that you got invited to and then getting $1,000. Granted, depending on how far you have to travel and everything like that, like $1,000 might just cover the expenses. But, if you get into, the top, 68 players, like you end up bumping that up $2,000, and then top 48, $3,000. No easy feat, but, it is what it is. Second chance, there is some second chance qualifiers that you can play in as well to kind of get you to that point where you can get invited to the third Pro Tour, the 2023-2024 season, which might be Bloomborough or something to that effect, but I'll have to look through. Oh, maybe it's like the Modern Horizons 3 Pro Tour. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Those are some of the the facts in that of what is going on as an event as a whole. With that said, we'll jump over to the draft portion of it, kind of giving an idea of what we're looking for, like in the draft format, and then giving you some of my personal experiences playing the format that I have. Because again, it's probably one of my favorite limited formats of all time, and it looks like it's a lot of fun. And I am definitely looking forward to watching the draft portion and the limited portion of a Pro Tour for probably the first time in a while. So let's go ahead, jump over that, and look at the sheet for the Outlaws of Thunder Junction draft. So here we have an article from the official, Magic the Gathering site where we have an early look at the Pro Tour Thunder Junction draft written by Marshall Sutcliffe, who notably does limited resources with Luis Scott Vargas, kind of has a pretty good insight on kind of the limited format, really across like multiple sets that have been released, just a long-standing series on, his limited resources channel. It's a pretty good source for information, pertaining to limited formats and stuff like that. Just a very good limited player, and just him and Luis also have a pretty good pulse on kind of like what's good and what isn't good in the format, especially, playing Magic for as long as they have. So Pro Tour Thunder Junction, kind of like this intro. Normally I say meet at high noon, then you'd be a little too late, referencing the fact that the event doesn't start necessarily at noon. Kind of funny, that it's just it's like an old Western kind of like adage, it's pretty sweet. So we are on the lead up to, talking about the Pro Tours of Thunder Junction, where players aren't going to have that long or nearly as long to kind of figure out what is going on in this draft format, like they did at Karlov Manor, where they had an extra week to test, figure out the format. Let's just say it'll be a much crunch time for the testing teams leading up to this Pro Tour. What does that mean for the average Pro Tour player and for you as the viewer? It means reading between the lines even more than normal and trusting the designers of the set to lead us down the right pathway for each color. So there's these signpost commons or signpost uncommons, which are essentially like typically a legendary creature of like a 2-color combination, and then like another creature or another kind of a card at the uncommon slot that kind of does this. And the example is Jolene, Plundering Pugilist with Cactus Folk Sure Shot, which, Jolene says whenever you attack with one or more creatures you control with power 4 or greater, you create a treasure token. She can stack treasure tokens to deal damage to any deal 1 damage to any target for 2 mana. And Cactus Folk Sure Shot is a 4 mana 4/4 reach with Ward 2. Being in combat on your turn, other creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain a trample and haste until end of turn. So Marshall goes on to say, here we have Jolene and Cactus Folk, both strong cards. They both give you a big hint as to what the color pair is all about. creatures with 4 power matters. Not only do they both have 4 power themselves, but they also get bonuses for having other creatures with 4 power or greater. So if you're in green red, you should care about creatures, especially cheaper ones that have 4 power or greater, and you should be aware of the combat tricks and pump spells that you can use pre-combat to make your creatures 4 power simple. So in this is pretty easy too. Like if you look at some of these signpost cards, we have a Gem Lightfoot is another one, like in the blue-white combination, where it's very obvious what's kind of going on. It says that if you did not cast a spell from your hand this turn, you get to draw an extra card, along with other cards that end up getting some of those effects for not playing cards from your hand on like a turn, or essentially, in the absolute worst case, like taking a turn off to maybe do something on your opponent's turn to end up getting the bonus on your turn, or just taking a turn to like plot things or play things from plot. In the extreme case with Picklock something. Of course, I can't remember the name, but it gives one of your instant sorcery in your graveyard flashbacks. So that's the way that you can cast like 2 spells without having actually cast a spell from your hand to kind of get like that benefit. Something that you expect from blue-white. Go on to black-green. Where we have Honest Rustine, which enters the battlefield, return a creature from your graveyard or your hand. Your creature spells cost 1 less to cast, and then Badlands Revival, return up to 1 target creature from graveyard from battlefield, return up to 1 target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this reanimates a creature and also gets another permanent card to your hand. So like in theory, this will get you a creature onto the battlefield and like another kind of like utility creature to the hand that maybe has like a cast trigger or something that you can like plot and do something with later on to kind of get like additional value from it, which is a pretty neat combination. I believe of like the color pairs, like green black is the one that notably stands out, where I don't think there's really a creature that necessarily goes back and kind of pairs well, like what we see with like Jolene and Cactus Folk Sure Shot, where obviously these kind of play off each other, where you're going to be able to attack with like Cactus Folk and then make a token with Jolene, but Cactus Folk can also give Jolene haste and things like that. So something that's pretty neat. Black-green is a hard time finding its footing in draft as the Blades designers experimented. It's something interesting, but ultimately not as competitive limited mechanics. Here in Thunder Junction, they keep it simple. Looks like black-green is exactly what it wants to be, digging stuff back up out of the grave, and I'm here for it. If you looked at the 2 signpost uncommons for black-green, the cards you'd be looking for: expendable creatures, perhaps small death touch creatures, self-mill, creature sacrifice, discard, etc. And we have like Rise of the Varmints, which is going to make X 2/1s, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Ankle Biter, surprisingly, has been like a pretty good card in some of the sealed decks that in the sealed deck format that I played in last weekend. Ankle Biter showed up quite a bit, and it was a pretty annoying card to have to deal with, in terms of some of like the fight combat tricks, where you're going to be able to take this card and you're going to be able to fight and kill like one of your opponent's like bigger creatures, also just making combat very difficult, because unless they really have a trampler, they're not going to push through damage, and they're going to trade like their best creature for arguably your worst creature. Forsaken Miner, I didn't see come up a lot, but definitely in the constructed formats where getting to commit a crime is very easy, and then you can pay 1 black mana to return this from your graveyard to the battlefield. Of course, we know there's some combos in constructed formats, but just a 1 mana 2/2 is a very aggressive creature, and then in a format where it is very easy, even like the lands, the dual lands and stuff that you play can commit crimes, that Forsaken Miner ends up being a pretty good card to have, that you can choose to get back if it is necessary to you or not, having some synergy with some of the other sacrifice outlets in the format as well. We have blue-black, which kind of definitely cares about committing crimes. We have Intimidation Campaign and Lazav. Lazav is just going to get bigger when you commit crimes, and then you can exile creatures from graveyards and have him become copies of those creatures. I've seen drafts where players have, play Lazav, they commit a crime, they put a counter on it, they don't do anything. A 2/5 or like a 3/6 is pretty impressive. But then like late in the game, they end up taking like a flyer that's like a 1/1 or 2/2 with lifelink, and it has like 3 or 4 counters on it. So they're attacking with a 6/6 flyer to kind of swing some races in their favor. Of course, even you need to take like your opponent's a big trampling creature as well, stack a bunch of counters on it, and then be able to attack through and kill your opponent. Intimidation Campaign coming down is kind of like a cycle of cards that we'd seen from more or less in the, Ravnica City of, or I guess like the 3rd iteration of the Return to Ravnica, years ago, back in like the 2016s, 2017s, where, we had Dovin's Acuity and we had Disinformation Campaign, and now we have Intimidation Campaign, which enters the battlefield. Each opponent loses a life, you gain a life and draw a card, and whenever you commit a crime, you return it to your hand. Now, following the same template as like Dovin's Acuity, where it says if you cast an instant, at any time that you cast a sorcery, something like that, you can pick it up. Disinformation Campaign, when you surveil, you can pick it up. So Intimidation Campaign, a little bit easier compared to the 3 to be able to kind of rebuy at the, getting to drain your opponent and draw a card. Gain a little bit of life as well to kind of help in some of those racing situations. Pretty good. And then showing off some of the blue and black cards that commit crimes, or take the fall, end up like in multiple archetypes is pretty good. Just getting to draw a card when you play it, potentially giving a creature -4/-0, committing a crime as well, pretty amazing. Consuming ashes, just really good removal. Exiling a creature straight up, and then getting some value if the creature costs less than consuming ashes. That doesn't exactly what it says. It says 3 or less, but I don't think there's really any ways to make instants or anything cost more, so kind of fits the bill. Desperate Bloodseeker, you can mill your opponent to commit a crime, or you can mill yourself to kind of go in with like the green-black stuff. Deserts do, if you have a decent amount of deserts, this ends up being a very good, even at -2/-2 for 2 mana is pretty good. And then, if you have like 1 or 2 deserts, -3 up to -4 is very good. Jailbreak Scheme, way to push through damage, put a counter on a creature you control, it can't be blocked this turn, or just getting to put a creature on top or bottom of target artifact or creature's owner, puts it on top or bottom of its library. So you have the potential, they tap out for a play, you end up putting it, essentially tempoing them out by getting rid of their play. You commit a crime in the process, and then also, your opponent has to decide, do they want to draw that card and replay it, or do they want to put it on the bottom and potentially play something else? So, that's something to keep in mind. As we were talking about, the land cycle of deserts at common that all commit a crime. They enter the battlefield tapped, and then they, when they enter the battlefield, they deal 1 damage to target opponent, which means that you commit a crime, which is very important to some of your other cards that care about committing crimes, like Intimidation Campaign, Lazav. There's some green and white cards that care about committing crimes as well. So definitely something to keep in mind when you are playing the format is that, on top of just fixing, these do synergize very well with the set in terms of, committing crimes and giving you that additional value where possible. Notably, too, that this has 4 sets in 1. So we have like these prosperity cards, which are, all about like committing crimes on your opponent. And then we have like these vault cards and everything like that. So, we have a few different things going on. So, with the advent of play boosters and the prevalence of extra sets in recent limited sets, you won't be surprised to hear more than one just strictly Outlaws of Thunder Junction card can be opened in packs at the Pro Tour. There is a ton of chances for rares to be available in the pack. There's plenty of drafts I've seen where there's like 3 or 4 rares in a pack, and that's absolutely insane. And if you've been, if you're a person that like drafted or has played like limited, had basically missed out on like the last, I would say, like few years at the very least, it's definitely going to be kind of jarring, because normally you'd open up 2 rares, you would have a rare in the rare slot, and then you'd have like a foil, which would probably more than likely be a rare. Otherwise, it'd be kind of like a pack error or whatnot. But this set, between the big score set, the prosperity cards, and of course like some of the other outlaw cards, and of course just the base rares in the set, you could potentially open 2, 3, 4 rares in a pack. That is possible. Which some of these being the prosperity cards that, again, end up committing crimes. So these aren't silly one-offs. They're powerful spells that every drafter will have to be fully familiar with if they want to maximize the chances of the coveted 3-0 day 1 of tournament. Absolutely, there's some very good cards. There's Back from War, Tyrant Scorn, Buried in the Garden, as the cards kind of showed off. One of the big ones, like you can get Oko, is probably like one of the best limited cards you can get. 3-mana Planeswalker that's going to make a 3/3 every other turn is pretty good even in this set. And can even technically commit crimes by turning your opponent's things into 3/3s and then getting to trigger your committed crime stuff as well, which is pretty significant, honestly. But yeah, like a lot of like these prosperity cards, they all commit crimes, they all do things. Hypothesizzle is another like one that I was kind of happy with playing, but I guess isn't really all that great, but it's just kind of a cool card nonetheless. So appearing significantly less often, but nevertheless still important, are the special guest cards. That's 10 more powerful reprints from Magic Past, and the big score, which are 30 more cards representing the coveted treasures and terrors inside of the vault. I played against Collector's Cage. Collector's Cage is pretty good. I've seen people playing Vaultborn Tyrant. That card's nuts. Sword of Wealth and Power, not so much, but like these 2 cards for sure have been, pretty big game. I had a few good red cards from like this vault set, and I didn't end up playing them in my limited deck, and maybe that was a mistake, but obviously we ended up top 8ing that RCQ, so it didn't really matter. You have a wide range of powerful cards. Even a small sample size, Sword of Wealth and Power is good enough for a deck with any creatures. Volborn is just dominating any deck that can cast it, and even some that can't, as there is some, Reanimator decks. But you got to usually be in green to kind of get some of that value as well. So there's some extra power here. There's some extra powers in the Prosperity cards. I mean, you really have to be aware of those cards, like when you're drafting and, when you're playing in like the sealed decks and things like that. The Cycle of Deserts I mentioned earlier provided mana fixing, a little damage, crime triggering, and they cater to those cards that specifically reference deserts all in one tidy package. And these are just some of the cards that, again, kind of reference deserts in their name, where Spinewood's Armadillo. Pay 2 mana, discard it, search your library for a basic or a desert, put into your hand, then shuffle, you gain 3. There's also like the Desert Outcast or whatever that ends up searching your library for a desert when it enters, and it gets +1/+1 for each desert. Deserts do, making your opponent's creature smaller. Cactarantula, just being a 5-mana 6/5 with reach, is very powerful. And if it becomes a target of spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. And there's very few cards. I mean, there is cards that end up dealing with Cactarantula all in one go. But if your opponent's having to, potentially, block and then also use like a spell or two to get rid of Cactarantula, you're going to end up drawing some cards from it as well. Well, probably committed to even commons like Cactarantula, A+ artwork, by the way, which, I will agree. Gives you a lot back as a 6/5, as a pain to get rid of. Deserts do, cheap removal, and of course, Spinewood's Armadillo. It's just another creature that you can get into the graveyard, and then you can reanimate back later. Ward 3 is definitely not insignificant, especially when, typically speaking, if you're not playing something like the other spell that we were looking at earlier in Consuming Ashes, you're going to have to spend multiple spells to get rid of Spinewoods. And, I already had a match, that I played in the RCQ last weekend where my opponent, had to have 2 spells to go into, even a Sphinx where you had to pay Ward 2, and that was still a very hard thing to pay. So something to keep in mind. Plus the original Reanimate itself is in the breaking news sheet, so you have typical just put target creature from a graveyard on the battlefield, lose life equal to its mana value. You have Badlands for, bring something back for more. Honest Rutsteen to bring it up. And one last job as well, to return a creature from a graveyard to the battlefield. And you can get a mount or vehicle and an or equipment from the graveyard to the battlefield attached to your creature you control as well. All for, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. You can get full value for this, which is pretty neat, honestly. Here's some more of the, Prosperity, or I guess the breaking news cards and what have you. Mindslaver, I've seen people do some cool things with Mindslaver. Villainous Wealth is like a way that you can mill your opponent out. And if not, you can just end up taking a bunch of their spells. I mean, if you do this for like X equals like 6 or 7, which I don't think is like completely out of the realm of possibility, you're just going to get more than likely at least 2 or 3 spells, we'll say, off of your opponent's deck. And, that's huge when you've essentially gotten to mill your opponent for, roughly, I would say like a 1/6 of their deck, about, of their total deck size. And then you get to cast like 2 or 3 spells, in the worst case off of it. Best case, obviously, 6 or 7 spells. Pretty sweet. Fracture Identity, you're going to get rid of their best permanent, and then you're going to get a copy of that card. Oko, busted Planeswalker, and limited, and then super busted and constructed, and of course Cruel Ultimatum as well. I mean, who doesn't like a good Cruel Ultimatum? And it goes on. Marshall goes on to say, if someone casts Cruel Ultimatum or Villainous Wealth on camera, I'm going to lose it, and likely someone else is just going to lose, which is absolutely true. And then we have the broadcast team here, where we have Maria. Elite. Oh gosh, I'm so bad. Elias V EDH on Twitter. Riley Knight, Cedric Phillips, Marshall Sutcliffe, Monty, and Corey, all kind of doing like the coverage and everything. All great casters, just very entertaining. A very good group of people. Just makes the matches exciting, and especially again like the limited format with kind of like all the crazy stuff that you can see from multiple rares in a pack to a bunch of synergy and things like that in the format as a whole. All these like there's a desert for each color combination, so there's 10 total deserts. So I mean, you could see people prioritizing and drafting 3, 4, 5 deserts, if they need it for like their mana base and things like that. So personal experience for me in this limited format, it has been a lot of fun. while there's definitely some better archetypes than others, where I think red black, I think is consensus one of the best. I think that, while there is bombs in the set that you absolutely need to have answers for, and if you can find a window to get rid of them, you absolutely have to get rid of them, and at the very least respect them for the potential of like coming down. Aside from that, I mean, really the format is very good. I've had a lot of games where, like you play your bomb and you just never have an answer for it and you get to win the game. But, if your opponent ends up having an answer for it, you're actually kind of like put a little bit on like the back foot and having to kind of navigate, a pretty tough situation. So overall, I mean, like I give Pro Tour Thunder, or really the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set, like an A+, honestly, as far as like limited formats. I've played in some pretty good ones, played in some pretty bad ones, and this is probably one of my favorite ones of all time. Again, just kind of what's available to you in the set in terms of what there is to do. All the archetypes are very much like blatantly laid out for you. And there is sort of kind of room for some intermingling as well. Or an example, like I play like a Jeskai deck in Sealed, where you're not really going to be able to build in necessarily one archetype. You're going to be kind of stretched into two. And I had a little bit of like double spell synergy as well as not casting spells on my turn. And there was like plenty of other flash cards that I had that I could play on my opponent's turn, so I could get the benefit of, drawing a card or making a 2/2 or whatever on my turn, while also on my opponent's turn getting to create clues or do any of the other, double spell synergies, and then casting spells on my turn when it was necessary to maybe push through extra damage or to get rid of like a problematic permanent I necessarily would not have been able to get rid of on any other turn. So I would say definitely, if you can, play this format while you can, because it is so much fun, especially since it is still pretty brand new. Like, there's tons of drafts and people playing and stuff like that going on, but by and large, it's a lot of fun, and again, it gets the thumbs up for me. So that is the limited portion of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Let's go ahead and take a look at the constructed portion of the event and try to wrap this whole thing up. So here we are for the constructed portion of the event, and honestly, I'm a little surprised at the metagame breakdown. Of course, I saw it before I started recording and everything, but I mean, so I don't watch and I don't play a lot of Standard, but from what I understand is that Standard was in a pretty good place. It's pretty healthy. But typically in formats like this, you end up finding like a best deck, and then you have some players just like playing some other stuff that have some pretty good matchups against like the best deck, plus some of the other things we got going on in the format. And this in particular is not very close, where we have, as per midrange, 65 decks being almost 31, just under 31.5% of the metagame is absolutely insane. And it goes down to kind of like what the other decks are doing here in a minute. So we'll go through like the top 5 decks. So as for midrange, 65 decks, 31.5% of the metagame. Boros Convoke, 22 decks, so almost a third, just over a third of the, Boros Convoke decks. I mean, like, Esper Midrange has almost triple the amount of decks that Boros Convoke has, which is absolutely insane. At 10.6% of the metagame. Teamer Analyst, which is like that lands deck that is trying to put, a bunch of lands into play using the, the fetch lands, if you will, from the Streets of New Capenna set to, end up searching basics out of your deck and then bringing them back to then end up getting more lands out of your deck to eventually kind of like fireball your opponent, or just make a ton of copies of other things and just absolutely overwhelm your opponent. 4-color Legends at 17 decks at 8.2%. Domain, which has kind of been like a mainstay of the format, at 6.8%, 14 decks. And then Azorius Control as the only other deck, now I guess the 6th deck, the only other deck that has double-digit copies at 10, which is 4.8% of the metagame. So pretty polarizing stuff. I mean, like 50% of the decks, just over 50, probably like 51%, 51.2% of the decks are, Esper Midrange, Boros Convoke, Teamer Analyst, kind of what I would expect from like a standard format. And then kind of rounding it out, like the other, 14, like 15% is Legends and Ramp. So roughly like 65% of the metagame is like 5 decks, which is kind of what I would come to expect from a standard format. Now, with how big this standard format actually is, with all the expansions from Midnight Hunt forward, which it feels like it's been in standard for a while, in kind of what we would see, mid-range decks typically end up getting better the more sets that you have, just because the cards have a lot more flexibility, and we see that from like Esper midrange, where they're playing white in Esper midrange, and Dimir midrange is like 56 less decks played than Esper midrange. So like the white obviously being pretty important, all things considered. So metagame features a lot of Esper midrange, but it looks quite diverse beyond that, which is true. I mean, if you get rid of the very polarizing like best deck, the fact that we have 4 decks past that are over 5%, another one that is nearing 5%, and another one like towards like the mid 4.5% is pretty good. And I would say if you got rid of Esper midrange and you just had the rest of these decks, this would be a very diverse metagame. So honestly, good on them. Again, Esper midrange finding a way to kind of like ruin it, I guess, in a way. So most non-play cards across all the main decks are Go for the Throat, Cut Down, Deep Cavern, Bat. These are staples and remain pillars of the format, as they have found a variety of decks, most notably in black midrange strategies. Creatures that die easily to go for the throat, such as Shieldred, are seeing comparatively little play. Although the metagame bears many similarities to the one right before the release of Outlaws of Thunder Junction, I covered in the last week's Standard Primer by Frank Carson, which again, this article will be linked if you want to read that. An introduction of hundreds of new cards have shaken things up. Let's take a look at the most important takeaways and developments and surprises from the Pro Tour Thunder Junction. The dominance of Esper midrange. So we know that Esper midrange was kind of a deck that people wanted to kind of play anyway, and Rafine just kind of getting to prioritize getting to play some cheap creatures, attack with all of them, have one of them connive, you draw a bunch of cards, you discard cards that you don't need, and then they end up growing in various powers. You end up drowning your opponent essentially in card advantage. And the fact of being a mid-range deck that you have some of these other cards that you kind of don't care about, like Pest Control, if it's not really something that you want, you can end up binning it after drawing a bunch of cards, binning it, and then, of course, growing your creature bigger while also potentially drawing spells that are going to be a little bit more relevant to what is going on. So, over the past few months, black midrange strategies have typically formed 30 to 40% of the standard metagame. This is never clear the best color combination was. Dimir midrange was the most prominent right before the release of Outlaws of Thunder Junction, leveraging its smooth mana base, low curve, and efficient counter magic. But the news has changed things, and with Outlaws of Thunder Junction, Esper midrange decisively took back the crown. With Concealed Courtyard to improve its mana base, as well as Rest in Peace and Pest Control, which are the cards that we see up here, swing previously difficult matchups against Temur Analyst and Boros Convoke after sideboard, it's become worthwhile to run white. So Esper midrange, with some help of cards from like the big score in Pest Control, ends up actually helping out a lot. Rest in Peace as well being printed into the format is pretty neat as well. Getting to use some other cards like Duelist of the Mind, which is actually a new card from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and Nathan Stoyer's World Championship card. And of course, getting to put counters on Deep Cavern Bat, or like Duelist of the Mind. Duelist of the Mind even getting big when you draw like 2, 3, 4 cards of like Rafine's ability as well. We see the resurgence of 4-color Legends, where we have this kind of weird card like Relic of the Legends, so you can just end up adding a ton of mana. Honest Rutstein looking to make some of these creatures like even cheaper. You have like Slowgurk. Slowgurk grows whenever you discard a land, and Rona Invasion discards a land to Inti, or Channel Otawara Takanuma. It's so easy to bounce and replay that you channel multiple lands every turn for value, which is absolutely insane. So Outlaws of Thunder Junction adds a substantial boost to the deck in the form of Honest Rutstein. She's mana off your key creatures, provides resiliency against spot removal, and even enables a new infinite combos. If you control Relic of Legends, Rona Invasion, and then 2 copies of Honest Rutstein, they can be looped infinitely. Tap Rona and Rutstein to untap Relic of Legends. Cast Rutstein, lose 1 to the legend rule, return it, and repeat. This allows you to win the game with Vile Smasher, Gleeful Grenadier, which is when another ally's battlefield you control deals 1 damage to a target opponent. Less common ways to explode this loop is Tiny Bones joins up, Illis Ikor, which does not come up, or Sadistic Pilgrim, Elisnor, Mother Machines, or Annie joins up. For homogeneity, any base blue-black, red-green mid deck with a single white card can still be labeled as 4-color Legends at the Pro Tour. The disappearance of Ban Toxic, not really a deck that has shown up. The most essential decks to have in the metagame is also important to recognize what's not there. Ban Toxic, which is a deck that I think was kind of whatever, but ended up being pretty good against like Domain and Life Gain. from the Teamer Analyst deck, which it can obviously negate all the life gain by giving your opponent poison counters. 0 players registered Venerated Rot Priest or Skrulv's Hive, which is something of note. There's some other novel strategies we've seen. Bloodletter of Alakazot's. That's how you say that. And then not Shadow or Mortality. So some players may use it or to put Shadow or Mortality on top of their library and allow Caustic Bronco to hit their other opponents for 15. Another combined Bloodletter with Rush of Dread, which makes your opponent lose half their life rounded up. And since if they would lose life, they lose twice that much life instead. You lose half, and then you multiply by 2. It's all. It ends up being all your life. And perhaps the feature match area, an Aftermath Analyst player might sacrifice dozens of lands to Pitiless Carnage, which says you sacrifice any number of permanents you control and then draw that many cards, which is absolutely bonkers. Only to defeat their opponent with Kellen the Kid and Dejiru and Hazaret as well. Oh my goodness. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of crazy things. Here's some of the most played cards. We have Concealed Courtyard, which of course registered in the Esper mid-range deck, which is going to be one of the most played decks or most played cards. And the next 2 spots belong to sideboard cards. We have Pest Control with 6 copies in the main deck, 157 in the sideboard, 154 Rest in Peace, none in the main here. Then we have Duelist in the Mind, Inspiring Vantage. 3 steps ahead. I'm not exactly sure what that card is. You have Honest Rutstein, Slick Shot Show Off, Blooming Marsh, Bonnie Paw, Clear Cutter, Forsaken Miner. A lot of these cards just being from the really like all these cards from the Thunder Junction. So this is kind of the impact that they have on the format, which is really neat. The most played new cards are Concealed Courtyard, Pest Control, blah, blah, blah. And then you have, something like Nurturing Pixie was actually kind of sweet for this. Bonnie Paul, which is like a limited bomb. Slick Shot Show Off might be one of the best cards, across like all formats printed in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Shoot the Sheriff, pretty good removal. Forsaken Miner, just, loops in other formats as well. And finally, we have the Road to Magic World Championship 30. At Pro Tour Thunder Junction, all competitors who clinch 36 match points or reach the top 8 will receive an invitation to Magic Championship 30, the crown jewel of organized play in 2024, as we count down the weeks leading up to the tournament in late October. Each week, we will look at the greatest decks from the past, reviewing the championships from 94, 95, and so on. Let's go back to 1999. So then it goes even deeper to like some of the old World Championship decks at least in this article, and then of course back to the broadcast team for that event. So while it seems like the standard metagame is pretty homogenized down to essentially mid-range decks, which is something to kind of expect when kind of like formats end up getting bigger, it is pretty neat to see all things considered, if you take away the top deck of the format, which is kind of what I would expect from standard for like a bunch of players to gravitate towards one deck, the metagame is very diverse. It's a really cool. The fact that like Boros Convoke is essentially kind of like looking to be the deck that, and even like Teamer Analysts are looking to be the decks that kind of win game 1 and then find a way to win at game 2 and game 3. Where like Esper midrange is going to be kind of the deck that is going to perform decently well to very well depending on matchups and on a match to match and a game to game basis. So I kind of look forward to looking at the standard park course. I really want to watch like the limited kind of portion of the event, but the standard format does look like it's pretty sweet, and I would say that the event itself will be okay as long as like Esper midrange doesn't put like 6 copies. Like realistically, if there's like 2 copies of Esper midrange, even 3, and then the rest of the decks are, unique, at least that kind of opens up the door to where maybe the only mirror match that you would see is potentially in the finals, or maybe you'll see one of the Esper midrange players knocked out, so we kind of get some unique matchups kind of as we go through the top 8, and that's kind of what you hope for, at least from like the viewer standpoint of things. So that is Pro Tour Outlaws of Thunder Junction. That's everything you need to know for the event itself, limited and the constructed formats. It's going on this weekend, so be sure to tune in on Twitch. The event starts on the East Coast. It's probably around like noon. Where on the West Coast, it's going to be like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, something like that. So definitely something to keep in mind. Be mindful of your time zones. Turn on notifications and stuff to like the Wizards Twitch channel so that you know when they actually go live for the event. And that's going to be this video. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what you're most excited for. If you made it to the end of this, what you're most excited for Pro Tour's Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Hopefully, tune in, watch it, enjoy the event and everything, because it's always a lot of fun getting to kind of see everything that goes on. So that's going to be this video. Hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one.